Hello, this is Wesley Lawton, a grief counselor with Hospice of Michigan, based in Macomb County. At least that's where I'm at. HOM is all over the Lower Peninsula. And I am the facilitator of the Men Overcoming Loss of Spouse or Partner support group, which takes place in Clinton Township at our office, as well as virtually over Zoom. And so I invite you, if you're watching this video, to join us on the third Tuesday of each month from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So our next one will be coming up as of this recording on August 16th, and looking forward to that. This is a summary of our July group um, and our July group meeting, some of the topics that we covered, and just wanted to share some things that I talked about, that the guys shared in the group, and just kind of allow you to review that if you were there, or kind of gain from some of that information, hopefully, if you're watching this video and couldn't make it to the group. And also as a way to learn a little bit more about what we do if you've never been to one of these support groups before. Of course, a major part of any support group, including this one, is just making that connection, in this case with other guys who are going through a similar type of loss to what you are. These are men who understand better than most what you're going through. Nobody can completely understand what you're going through because nobody knew your spouse or partner in the way that you did. And so it's a unique loss that has never happened before and will never happen again in human history. Um, and that can make you feel very alone. But um, connecting with others who have had a similar type of loss, who have had a lot of the same feelings, a lot of the same thoughts, a lot of the same experiences, even if they're not all exactly the same, that can go a long way to help you feel less alone. It's one thing to hear me talk about this, but I'm not talking about my own loss. I'm sharing from what I've learned from others who are going through something similar to you. It's something really special to actually make that connection in real time with others who are going through it. So that's really, in my mind, that's right around half of the benefit of joining this group. The information that I'm sharing, I hope, will give you some tools for your grief journey, but you've still got to do the work. And hearing this from me is not really doing work, it's gaining tools. Connecting with other guys in a support group, I do consider that to be doing work, because that's a chance for you to talk through what you're going through, to express your feelings. Um, that's a lot of what the grief work is. You're applying these tools to your situation, to your story, and figuring out what that all looks like, kind of organizing it in your mind. So anyway, it's enough introduction. Um, so we talked about a handful of major topics. One of them is that one of the guys asked whether it's normal to talk to your spouse after she died. And um, there were a lot of nodding heads in the group. And I'm sure that I've talked about this before in a past video. There are so many topics that are so common that I'm sure that I'll come back to them. And also, I'm sure that not everybody who's watching this has seen all of the past videos. So I think it's worth revisiting some topics from time to time. This being one of them. Yes, it is very normal to talk to somebody after they died, especially if it's somebody who you lived with, who you're used to talking through everything with, like you would with a partner or spouse. I would say that over half of people seem to do that if it's somebody who they lived with, especially. And I sometimes joke, but it's actually true, that in my experience, that out of those people who do talk to their loved one, over half of them are a little embarrassed by it. They wonder if it's a crazy thing to do, if it's something that might get kind of a raised eyebrow if they say that they talk to their loved one. And there's a big distinction between talking to your loved one and continuing to process as if they're in the room, and perhaps you believe that they are with you in some very real way, but it's different than it used to be. And that's the distinction, because there's a difference between that and pretending like they're still alive, actually trying to act as if they really are still alive in the way that you've always known them. That kind of mindset, that kind of behavior will create problems for you as time goes on. But talking to them, um, you can do that for as long as you want. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you believe that they're with you, or perhaps in heaven and can hear you anyway, that's all the more reason to do it, because that's a way of sort of keeping that relationship going, even though it looks completely different and the loss is still there. It's not about you're not leaving them in the past and pretending like you can't talk to them, you can't think about what they would be saying. You might do it out loud. Many people do. You might just sort of do it in your mind. And as I mentioned, you probably knew this person well enough and know them well enough to know what they would be saying back to you. And I find that pretty amazing too, that their thoughts, their wisdom, their love can continue to help you even as you're grieving their death. I find that to be such an amazing thing whenever I consider it. So yes, that's a very normal thing to do. You're in good company if you do that. It might be very helpful. Perhaps over time, as you work through your grief, you'll find yourself wanting to do that less and less, and that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. There are no rights and wrongs when it comes to that kind of a practice. And if you're somebody who doesn't do that, there's nothing wrong with you either. You're also in good company. Many people don't do that. They just don't really see a point to it, especially if you have if I would say if you have a lot of social support, if you're talking to other people, or if you're expressing your thoughts, feelings, and your grief in other ways, such as journaling, so or connecting with a lot of support groups or something like that. Another thing that came up was anger. There was a gentleman who was new to our group, and he shared that he feels angry a lot. And this is another topic I've gone over before in more detail, but talked about how, yes, anger is a really common feeling with grief and is even more common with men than with others. Um, and I believe, and I'm sure, I want to say I've come across research for this. I haven't reviewed it in a while, but either way, I have a lot of confidence that um, that largely comes from societal expectations and expectations on us from our families of origin and other people who we encountered as young boys. Um, Anger is one of the most, if not the most, acceptable socially emotion in our society. Um, if you're feeling really sad and you express that as a man or as a young boy, now this is changing over time, thankfully, but a lot of the experiences that we have had has been, big boys don't cry, right? Or boys don't cry at all. Men don't cry. That is somehow a sign of weakness and you're just expected to just, sort of suck it up and carry it. Even I've seen being really expressive of happiness is sometimes sort of like, okay, hey, calm down. It's not that big of a deal. Just that stoicism, and stoicism has a lot of merits, but to be expected to be that way as a young boy all the time, or even as a man all the time, just not realistic to what a lot of us feel on the inside and what a lot of us naturally express. And so what happens, because that is the most socially acceptable in a lot of people, in a lot of our experiences, is that other feelings can come out as anger, especially a lot of the more negative feelings, sadness, loneliness, guilt, fear, disappointment, resentment. A lot of things come out as anger. And we sort of tell ourselves that we're just feeling really angry. That might be how it's coming out. And a lot of times it is simply anger, and there's nothing wrong with anger in and of itself either. The tricky thing with anger is that it can often be a really destructive feeling to express. And so the key is to find ways to express it. And there are many options that are not destructive. They don't have to be constructive. Maybe they are. Maybe you channel your anger into building something literally constructive or gardening, some kind of creative endeavor. Or volunteer work or something like that. You let your anger give you energy, but even if it's just benign, doesn't have to be constructive or destructive. Just don't want to be hurting anybody physically, emotionally, mentally, of course. So if you're punching a cushion, if you want to take out physical aggression in that way, nobody's getting hurt by that. If you need to yell in a way that it's not scaring anybody, hopefully that's fine too. Maybe you talk it out. Maybe you exercise. That's a really constructive way to get your anger out. But a lot of times, what we find is that anger is a masking emotion. And so, as you're expressing your anger in a way that's not destructive, also be checking in and asking yourself what else might be there. from my observation, the most common thing that is under anger, especially after a loss, is pain. And again, you can see how that's something that we're sort of told not to express. If you show pain, that is a way of showing weakness, we're told. When in reality, pain is a fact of life. And the fact that we feel pain makes us human. So perhaps it's pain for you, or some of those other things that I said. Fear is another really common one. Guilt is another common one. Um, Simply sadness or loneliness, also very common. So ask yourself, are these things also here? Maybe I wasn't really comfortable with them or aware of them before, um, but those also should be expressed if you're going to be working through your grief and getting to a better place. And so tied to this, I mentioned already resentment. And this is something that one or two of the guys talked about, and multiple others connected with that feeling of resentment, and especially of seeing others who still have their spouse, or if you have another type of loss, perhaps you've lost a child and you've been through this, or a parent, maybe around Father's Day, Mother's Day, some other holiday. Um, but in the context of this group, a spouse, being around other couples, including other couples who you've been friends with maybe for decades or at least years. And you can feel bad about that resentment. Um, and I guess what I wanted to share about that and what we talked about in the group is that's a very normal thing. Of course, how could you not feel at least a little bit of resentment from time to time that they still have their loved one and you don't? And that can make you feel more lonely. It can make you feel like you're angry at them, which can be confusing because they haven't done anything wrong by not having their loved one die. Um, and so I want you to note that that's normal, that's understandable, that's natural. Um, and what can help with that? A few things. First of all, can help, and this is such an important question in any circumstance, really, but especially in this one, is to ask yourself, what do I want? What is my desire in this situation? Do I want that person to go through the pain that I'm going through? I'm willing to bet that the answer is no. And so, really, I think if you dig deep, you'll find that you're not really angry at that person. Your your anger, your negative emotions are not directed at them as if they have done something wrong. It might kind of feel that way, but if you really think about it, that's not what's going on. What's going on most of the time is that it, them being together reminds you of how you are not together with your partner, with your spouse. And so it's a trigger for that pain. It's a trigger for your grief. Um, you don't wish that they were going through the same type of loss, but you wish that you were not going through that type of loss. And being with them might bring you really close face to face with that in an intense way. It's not their fault. There's nothing that they can really do about it. But it can still be a problem for you. And so express that resentment, certainly express that pain, cry when you need to. That's the thing about crying is it's not wrong to cry. It's not wrong not to cry. It's just when the feelings come up, let it out. That's the healthiest way to do it, from what I've seen. Or maybe it's not an appropriate moment. Maybe it's not a comfortable moment to do that, or it's an especially uncomfortable moment. It's okay to wait a couple hours or so until you're on your own, if that's what you need to do. The important thing is to get it out, and the sooner the better. Uh, so express it, validate your own pain, understand, okay, this is understandable. My pain, my sadness, it's a reflection of the love that I have for this special person who died. And I'm not going to apologize for that love. Um, but you can also reflect on the things that you do have. And I'm not talking about, just sort of staying positive and looking at the silver lining all the time in this kind of fake way that a lot of people might do or might encourage us to do. I don't think that's helpful. You've got to start, as I said, with validating and expressing that pain, being real with yourself about it. And then, as you are doing that or after you have done that, I encourage you to move into gratitude and to think about the gifts in your life that you do have still. It doesn't take away from your loss, but it also, your loss doesn't have to take away from those gifts either. Perhaps your health, perhaps support and love from others, perhaps an activity that you enjoy, perhaps the sunshine, perhaps music. Um, you know, I could go on about the possibilities, fresh air, or whatever it might be, a comfortable home. Uh, to count your blessings, so to speak. This is an important thing to hold on to as you are real with yourself about your pain. And then the other thing is that going back to the fact that being with those couples or being with that person who still has their spouse, maybe it's especially around Valentine's Day or a holiday, some other big day, or anytime. It's okay to distance yourself from that person a little bit, or a lot if you need to, especially if they're not a really positive or helpful, supportive person to be around anyway. But even if they are, it's okay to spend a little bit less time with them. That's natural. That's understandable. Maybe that's the last thing you want to do. And so, yeah, so maybe you just sort of express your pain and you see your resentment for what it is and you continue to spend time with them. That's great too if you want to go that direction. But it's also okay to distance yourself. You may find yourself, your relationship changing, your relationships changing, your friendships changing, the kinds of people who you spend time with changing as you are going through this grief. May spend less time with the couples, more time with other widowers or um, with other single people or people in a different stage of life. Of course, most of us realize as we look through our lives that we tend to gravitate towards people who are going through similar things. And so that used to be the couples who spent a lot of time together, perhaps, and that's no longer the case for you. And that's a sad thing, and that you may count that as a secondary loss of those relationships. And again, you certainly don't have to distance from them either. That's going to be a personal, individual kind of a choice. But it is okay if you choose to do that. Okay, moving on. A couple other things. One of the things we touched on, or I should say we spent some time with, something that I've already talked about just a little bit, and that is the importance of expressing feelings. It's another really basic thing, but so important and so easy to gloss over. And perhaps you're new in your loss and you're not really aware of this, but expressing feelings, I see that as one of really the foundational aspects of grief. And as I said, some of us are more comfortable with that than others, but it's important to try to get used to that, to practice that, to check in with yourself and ask, what am I feeling? And maybe that's something that you've never really done on a regular basis before. Um, but it's really going to be necessary. It's really going to give you a big advantage as you're working through your grief. Um, and it might seem a little bit silly, but some of the things that we teach little kids to do to identify their feelings, to um, think about what their body is doing, or about well, I won't say like what faces they're making. We don't have to get that childish necessarily, but it's okay to, if it feels really basic, like if you're not sure what you're feeling, that's a very normal adult thing to go through, even though it might seem kind of silly. So um, check in and ask, what am I feeling? And you might not be sure still, no matter how much you sort of sit with that. It might be hard to put words to that. You don't necessarily need to. The important thing is to notice what you're feeling and to, again, express it as you need to. This is something also that a lot of women have an easier time with than men a lot of times because of the way we're raised largely. But paying attention to your intuition, your feeling of, okay, I think that this is what's right. I think that this is what I need. Might just sort of come to you. Your brain kind of understands that. It takes shortcuts to get that. And a lot of times we guys like to be rational all the time, like to do things that make sense, put together a puzzle, solve the problem in a rational way. That's not the way that grief often works, unfortunately. And so we may just need to go based on that intuition, even if we don't understand it. Our feelings so often do not make sense. Neither does grief. Neither does love. And so it's okay to do things that don't make sense. Again, as long as you're not hurting anybody, go for it. See if it works. Give it a try. Trial and error, experimentation and stumbling through is often what this looks like. Okay. And last but not least, the thing that I wanted to bring up was that there were a few guys who took time to share their stories of loss. They reviewed what happened, when their loved one was diagnosed with an illness, or on the day that they died, perhaps from some kind of accident or unexpected circumstance, what they went through, taking care of them, the decisions that they made, the things that they saw and heard, the things that they felt as their loved one died and in the following days and what they've come to up to this point. The grief journey doesn't necessarily start at the time of your loved one's death. Your losses start to take place, and the anticipation of their death starts to take place sometimes well before the death actually does. Excuse me. So understand that that is another really normal, common, often helpful thing to do. You might be returning to it over and over again. And that's just sort of how our brains process a lot of times. So writing, as I've mentioned before, can be very helpful. Talking to others who have been through it, or to a friend who's a good listener, or another supportive loved one. Um, these things are important. And you might have been through some kind of trauma. In fact, I find that probably around half, if not more, of grieving spouses have been through a trauma, seeing their loved one go through what they went through before they died. How can that not traumatize you? How can that not sort of haunt you as unwanted thoughts and memories that your brain goes to without wanting to, without trying to? And so you may want to connect with the therapist on that, or you may simply talk about it and revisit it and express it um, in a way that feels safe and comfortable for you. Again, writing is a great way to do that, talking about it. And also, as you express what's going on right now, as you express those feelings that you're feeling in this moment, that I have found often does help also with the traumatic experiences of the past. That can be one of the most effective ways to deal with that. So yeah, it's important to share not only what you're going through now, but about what you've been through before. That's a normal part of the healing. Okay, that's all that I've got. Thank you for watching. As always, I encourage you to share this with somebody if you think that it might be helpful to them, or if you want them to know about the kinds of things we talk about in the group. And of course, this is posted to our Men Overcoming Loss video archives page, which has some videos from past years, even before this was a specific loss of spouse group, and there were other facilitators. You can go back and watch months and months and months before. And so I see that as a really valuable resource that is totally free for you. So feel free to check those out too if you found this to be helpful or you think something similar might be helpful. Okay, I hope that you will join us if you are able to and you think that it would benefit you, and to share and support the other guys who are in the group. And otherwise, I hope you'll take care. And if you're watching this when I'm recording it in August, I hope the rest of your summertime is pleasant for you. Thank you.